It will be recorded. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Naja Brown is going to help facilitate this discussion session with me. So she'll be looking for individuals that have their hand raised, or if you type a question on the chat line, she'll be looking for that as well. So there'll be two of us working that. Okay, again, this is opportunity from us to find out from Dr. Jones his vision for Seattle Public Schools, the opportunities that he sees, and then how we, RARE and its supporters, can help him achieve his goal for racial equity. So, Tony, before we get started, any comments or anything you want to say?
No, just greetings to everybody, both regular attenders and new people showing up today. Thanks, as Joe said, to Dr. Jones finding the time. And Dr. Jones, for us, it's a two-way street. If there's things you want to know and ask about our group, it's diverse. It's in many ways, several of us are former teachers in the Seattle schools. So anyway, we really look forward to hearing from you and from questions from everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, Dr. Jones, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate being here today. And I have to apologize in advance. I'm in the middle of 2 board work sessions, so I don't think I can do the full 90 minutes. It'd probably be more like 60 to 75 minutes. So I will be brief in my remarks so that we can get to your questions. It's good to see some of you on the call. I know a few of you. I've worked with a few of you, and I appreciate it. And I know this is a Roosevelt-focused entity. Don't hold it against me. I'm a Franklin graduate, and I have great friends, best friends actually, that went to Roosevelt. So now that I'm superintendent, I don't discriminate on which is the best high school in the district. They're all fantastic and wonderful. So just a little bit about me, because I think what I learned when I went to school in Texas is you got to know who you're dealing with a little bit. So I want you all to know a little bit about my background. I started my educational career at a small school in the Valley called Harrison, and that became Martin Luther King Elementary School. And then I transferred over to John Muir, and then I went to Hawthorne Elementary. I went to Hawthorne Elementary, then I went to John Muir. Then I was one of the students that was part of the busing in 1977, I believe. And I went out to, a bunch of us from the South End went out to Broadview. It was a Broadview Elementary School at the time. Then we came back to the South End into Sharpless, which is now Aki Karosi. And then I proceeded to matriculate through Franklin High School. And then I went to the University of Washington, and then I did my graduate work at the University of Texas, which I met my bride, and now we are 20 years in. She is an educator as well. She works at the University of Washington. I'm also a parent in the district, and I'm proud to soon to be walking my daughter across the stage. She's a Cleveland senior, and she's going to be finishing in the class of 2021. And then my mother was a teacher in the district, so I am very connected to Seattle Public Schools, and I love it, and I love it so much. This will be my 3rd return trip to Seattle. Previously, I was the executive director of human resources under Dr. Maria Goodloe Johnson, and then I came back and was hired by Jose Banda, and then served under Larry Nyland, superintendent, as the assistant superintendent for human resources, and then later as the chief of equity, partnerships, and engagement. And in that role, I was very instrumental in helping move the agenda on what we now call the Seattle Excellence Plan. But back then, it was really about learning about equity and what it meant in practice. And I'll talk a little bit about that kind of in my remarks. So I'm 6 weeks in, or this is my 6th week. I'm learning a lot in the role. I am the interim superintendent. I have a 14-month contract. I'm trying to make sure that we get a lot of things done. I'm unencumbered, and I'm ready to be decisive on behalf of students. My self-appointed duty is to create the conditions for students to thrive. I'm gonna say it one more time. My self-appointed duty is to create the conditions for students to thrive. And my board agrees with that, and they believe that's a good mission. So really want to tell you a little bit about how I'm onboarding. One of the concerns that a lot of people have a relationship with the superintendent and the board. My relationship with the board, which I believe will be sustained this way, is very solid. It's very interactive, lots of communication, and we have a really good start. I also have really good relationships with the community-based organizations, particularly the Seattle Council PTSA, and some other organizations that are really key to us moving the needle. One thing that you'll be excited about is we have a new governance model that the board and I are working through, and it's called Student Outcome Focus Governance. And it's really making sure that we're focused on student outcomes versus the wealth and diversity of adult issues. A lot of times we get caught up in the how we do things with a lot of adult input and a lot of adult needs, wants, wishes, desires, fears, and concerns, and we lose the focus on students. And so we're working on what's called student outcome focused governance. I also have a really solid, experienced cabinet leadership team, and they range from inside education and outside of education, people from the area of, grew up in the Seattle area, came through Seattle Public Schools. And so we have a nice diversity of leaders in the cabinet. We have a really solid strategic plan, and that strategic plan, which I hope you all are familiar with, is called Seattle Excellence. And I claim it to be excellent because it was generated from the community. It was a community-driven process back in 2019, and they came up with the 4 key tenets of our strategic plan, and we're leading with that. And that plan is important because it kind of tags to what you all are about. Students of color furthest from educational justice have been centered in that strategic plan, with a particular emphasis on African-American males. And we have a fresh start. We have a real positive, optimal outlook right now, and we're moving forward with a lot of energy and focus. A couple other pieces I want to just tee up, and then I'll be ready to receive and field your questions. As you know, we're moving from the hybrid remote this year to full-time in person. And we know how to do that. And we've done that for literally over 120 years. And so we claim some expertise in that space. And so as we come back in the fall, September 1st, the plan is full-time in person. We are really focused on this next year on 3 major things. One is 86 days from now is the start of school. That's September 1st. And we are going all in for in-person, full-time instruction. And we've learned a lot over the last year, and we're going to apply that forward. Our teachers have learned quite a bit of new techniques and have been able to leverage what they've already known to really prevent us from having what I consider what a lot of people think is a learning loss. We've done a really good job over this last year to make sure that we've held those things in place, and we'll push those forward into the fall. The 3 things that I want to focus on during the fall return is, one is wellness. I want to have an increase in wellness, and not just wellness for students, but wellness with adults. I think it's important that we have a well-being program for adults that are serving our students. And so we know that we came off the year of COVID, and we also came off the year of the racial reckoning, and that's created a lot of challenges for our students and staff. And we need to make sure that we recognize that people are in a space of coping and being resilient, and even have gone through trauma. And so we want to make sure that we address those climate issues going forward. The other piece, number 2, that I really want to focus on is responsiveness. And responsiveness is around district office responsiveness to schools, schools responsiveness to families, and schools responsiveness to students. we want to increase the amount of follow-up and follow-through and create a culture that people's concerns are taken seriously and that they have an expectation for follow-up, comprehensive follow-up, and that they're ensured that their needs are going to be met or at least addressed and they get an answer. And if you all are putting things in the chat, I'm not really tracking that well, so feel free to tee that up a little later and I'll respond to it. And then lastly, our bread and butter is meeting learning outcomes. It is critical that we focus on not necessarily the process and some of the performative steps, but really what outcomes have we said that we were going to achieve, and are we achieving them? And so, with example, we've had third grade reading as a goal, and we're doing a lot of really good pieces, curriculum selections, instructional practices. But at the end of the day, what are the barriers to make sure that, in this case, African American males are reading? What systems barriers are we removing, and what's working? And we want to make sure that we spread that. So those are some of the focus areas that I'm looking at onboarding. You know, this is again my 6th week. I think we're making good progress so far, but I'm here to be a servant and to serve the parents and the students of Seattle Public Schools. And so with that, I'd be more than happy to start answering some of the questions that you've either sent to me or that you've developed since I've talked. So thank you so much.
Okay. The first question we had on here, I think you've already answered that. So I'm gonna skip that and move to the second, and I'll combine the second and third. It's what is your opinion of the status of racial equity in our Seattle schools, and what are your plans to improve racial equity?
So I'm gonna weave a little bit. I think it's important to kind of think about the history of where we were, where we are, and I'll go back probably about 10 years. In 2012, we stood up policy 0030, and that was ensuring educational and racial equity. At the time, we were the 2nd school district in the nation, besides St. Paul and Minnesota, to have such a policy. And that policy, in my opinion, kind of lay dormant for a little while because we weren't really acting on that policy in an intentional way. And since that time, we've developed racial equity teams. We've developed, like I said, the 2019 strategic plan. We've done a lot to really focus on this concept of targeted universalism. And targeted universalism suggests that you look at one of your groups that's furthest from the goals that you want to achieve and aspire to in your district, and you put resource and attention behind that so that you make sure that your system changes in order to meet the goals for that certain population. We've named that over the last 10 years, and we've gotten good at naming that. We've gotten good at looking at our data. We've gotten really good at understanding what needs to be done. The next phase of where we are now is actually to do it. So we're now talking about being outcome focused. And I think we're in good shape now. It's just a matter of us saying as a district and as a community that we are unapologetic about outcomes now. We've talked a lot about the narrative. I think we understand the challenge that's in front of us, but this is the first time that we've been able to name it and say, these are outcomes that we want to have for specific students. So we got a lot of credit for, again, our refocus, our understanding the nature of the issue, but now it's time to execute. So I think we're in good shape, but now it's time to take it to that next level.
Okay, great.
Dr. Jones, my name is Naja Brown, and I'll be moderating with Joe. Welcome, and thank you for your time. So the next question we have for you is, given what you've just said, with your outcome focus and everything that's in place to achieve racial equity in our schools, what do you see as the major obstacle that would keep you from implementing your racial equity agenda?
Well, I believe strongly that really sound instructional practices. I think our educators teach well. Our principals know what to do in terms of setting up the learning environment. However, I believe the main obstacle is creating a sense of belonging, creating a welcoming environment culture. I think the learning is hard to take hold if students aren't feeling like they're part of the fabric of what we do. If they're not engaged, and if they're not experiencing joy in their learning, if they don't have interesting and culturally relevant curriculum, I think that's going to be a challenge. But I feel strongly that we have the right curriculum and the right teaching practices, the right instructional practices. It's really a matter of making sure that each and every one of our students have a sense of belonging in each classroom and every building.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next question. How should we measure the success or failure of your racial equity agenda? And does success look different in predominantly white schools?
Yeah, so we will not fail. Failure is not an option. That's something that we just have to, even though it's possible, it's not going to be part of my language moving forward. I think it's important to become a learning organization. I think we need to talk about those things that haven't worked in the past and have honest dialogues internally and externally around what are we doing to mitigate the challenges that have emerged in the past, and what are we doing to spread what we've learned over time. And so I think there's the obstacles are really us as adults, frankly, being caught up in an adult agenda. If we really focus on what students' needs are and have a good capture of what those needs are, I think we have nothing but success. But when we get caught up in a lot of our issues as adults, like I mentioned, I think it gets us off track, and it leads us down a path of not where we want to be. So I think it's really around us being focused.
Okay, the next question is, restorative justice is very popular, the principles of restorative justice and the practices, a good way to be able to handle racial conflicts. What are your thoughts on restorative justice, and do you see this as a potential program for all schools within the Seattle Public Schools?
Yeah, I'm a believer in not only the restorative justice as a practice and the specifics of it, but as a concept as well. I know that we have some schools already that have restorative justice specialists who have studied restorative justice and have practiced it. And I think part of the challenge that we have going forward is, how do we resolve issues at the lowest level? And what are the mechanisms that we use so that restorative justice can take hold? We have traditional processes where a student, for example, will make a claim, it goes through a process, it gets investigated in a very traditional process, and that could be a very protracted process. And it leaves it really, frankly, up to adults to make a judgment on that student's situation. Restorative practice suggests that students can get together with some facilitation from adults, and maybe even facilitation from students, to really get down to the root cause of what was the original challenge. And so I believe that restorative justice is a model for us to emulate going forward. And I think if you think about it in three frames, one, it allows us to, one, recognize the issue, the true essence of the issue. Two, we can reconcile exactly what the issue is. And three, we can restore those people who have been harmed in a real powerful and pointed way. And so I believe restorative practices, restorative justice are progressive and something that we should think about spreading beyond the 3 or 4 or 5 schools, particularly in the Southeast region, that are doing that now.
Okay. The State Board of Education voted this spring to make an ethnic studies requirement for high school graduation. The vote was non-binding and there is no timeline to put it into effect. When can we expect ethnic studies to be a requirement for all Seattle high school graduates?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to the specific around a requirement, but I am a champion of ethnic studies. I believe it's interesting, it's curious, it's an alternative to just simply the history that we've had in the past. I think it's a way to engage students in a way that we haven't in the past. But I believe that Kyle Kinoshita, who's on the line right now, set us up for a really great framework for us to move forward with having not only ethnic studies, but Black studies. We also have Native American studies, but we really want to have more culturally relevant curriculum for students that's supplemental to what we're doing already. So I believe ethnic studies is here to stay, and whether we name it as such or not, I just think it's part of what we do going forward. So ethnic studies is here to stay.
Dr. Jones, one of our programs, rarest programs, is to award students of color scholarships. And so we awarded 2 scholarships this year. Both were in the amount of $5,000. And one of our recipients, her name is Leah Scott, a Roosevelt High School student, wrote an article back in May, and it was in the Seattle Times Student Voices. Did you get a chance to review that article? It was about financial literacy.
Yes, I reviewed that article back when it was written, and then I reviewed it just recently. It's a great article.
Okay, so what are your thoughts about her statement that you know, Seattle Public Schools, well, Washington promised her that she would become fluent in financial literacy, and she feels as though she was failed. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I believe financial literacy is frankly a game changer. At least the community that I come from, we focus a lot on educational attainment, skill attainment, moving through the rungs of matriculating through educational institutions. But one of the pieces that has been woefully inadequate is just the knowledge of the finance and economic systems that exist right now. And so to the extent that we can expand the financial literacy opportunities that are already embedded in some classes, that's great. But I think it's time to think about how do we have some independent classes that are really focused on financial literacy. So I believe she was right. I think it's part of our obligation not just to teach math and other subjects, but we really need to get into some financial literacy in the early grades and not just in high school. I think we can do that from maybe even pre-K all the way up through to senior year. But yes, it's something is necessary and needed.
Thank you.
This question here that came in, I find to be very interesting. Interested to see how you'll answer it. Okay. What are your thoughts on approaching the racial equity work in predominantly white schools like Roosevelt versus more diverse schools in the district?
So that's a fantastic question. Racial equity has always been not necessarily those who are, I mean, it's been, let me just be frank, it's everyone's issue. And it's been way overdue time for those people who have the power to find ways to address racial equity. We've leaned on, at least in this district, we've leaned on people of color time and time again to solve the racial equity issue and problem. Now we have to have a much more inclusive approach to racial equity. And so particularly when you're in a school that, as you described with Roosevelt, that has a predominantly white population, it's time to at least start with recognizing what the real issues are. And everyone needs to participate in being solution oriented to achieving racial equity. And so if we continue to leave it to students who have been on the short end of of racism and discrimination for them to resolve their own issues, that's a failed strategy. It's time for all the adults to come together and really recognize what the issues are so that we can get to some real reconciliation. Until such time, that will always persist at schools with the profile and population of Roosevelt. So I think it's time to really just start to have honest dialogues about what is the root cause of the challenge of why we're not achieving the level of racial equity that we wanted. So that's my response to that question.
Okay.
Thank you. So apparently there's an anti-racism policy that's on the books, so policy 0040. And the question that we're going to pose to you is, can you commit to working with the school board to finally pass this policy?
I can commit to coming up with a superintendent procedure that recognizes racism, and that would be a precursor or a complement to such a policy. The policy is purview of the school board, and the school board would have to lift that policy up. But I can commit to being, again, having a very clear procedure that would be predictable and consistent for when a student experiences a racist situation, that a parent or a family member would know what to expect at each school, and that would be a clear progression for each student. So the policy is under the purview of the board, but I believe the board is ready to adopt such a policy. It's still early on in the process, and we still need a little more community engagement to get that passed, but that is on the docket, so to speak, for our school board.
So I have one follow-up question to that. For those of us who may not be familiar with the process by which a policy is adopted, can you kind of outline that for us? And what is a normal time frame from the inception of the writing of a policy to the adoption of the policy by the board?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in 2012, there was the adoption of policy 0030.
Yes.
And that policy was ensuring educational and racial equity. And I don't have exact history on that, but I think that took a while for that to come together. I think it was prompted by community members, by the Equity Race Advisory Committee, and other folks to really, and it was community driven. And so the policy in and of itself is really just an intro in one board meeting and action in the subsequent board meeting. But the generation of the community engagement and all the input and the participatory dialogue, it can take weeks to months to years. And so this policy, it's in the 00 sequence. So it would be considered to be one of the quote unquote flagship policies. So it would need, I would believe, extensive engagement before it would be adopted wholesale moving forward. But a policy in and of itself can be introduced in one board meeting and take an action on the subsequent board meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to go ahead now and open it up to questions from the group. It could be questions, it could be opinions you have based on what's been said, or just anything that you have on your mind. So just go ahead, if you would, just raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. And then at that point, go ahead and unmute yourself. So open it up for questions.
And
Yes.
Joe, do I get to ask questions too?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yes. Do you want to start? You want to start with a question?
Yes, I do want to start with a question. I really like this question around what are your thoughts around approaching the racial equity work at predominantly white spaces like Roosevelt? What are your thoughts about what's necessary to address that? And I'd appreciate that for context, so that when I take it back and reflect, I can share that with my team.
Okay. Okay, let me open it up to if anyone wants to answer that question, and then I'll jump in. But anyone want to say anything? Thoughts?
Oh, Geraldine has.
Gerald?
Carolyn.
No, you know what, Anne, go ahead. You've done a lot more work specific to RHS. Go ahead.
So I was just going to give some context because, Dr. Jones, thank you for coming. It's great to meet you. I've been on, as other few on this group call have been on the Race and Equity Committee at Roosevelt for the last almost year. So we've been kind of asking that same question. And the context I have is that there's such a variety of where people are, across the community, that it's a super hard question to answer, because some people are, very aware of just the, racism in general and in society, and they're very dialed into it. Some people are totally it's not even a thing. And then there's some people that are very focused on an incident that happened, like some stupid thing that was said on social media, and what's happening with that, that kid that said that thing, and other people are more concerned about the representation of Black and people of color students in clubs or on the teaching staff, or so we want, the committee has wanted to engage everybody and give them what they need, whether they need education or they need a way to, build relationships, or, but I don't have an answer. I'm just saying we have the same question, and it's a tough one. I don't know if I see Natalia's got her hand raised, and she's also on the committee, so maybe she could add some more.
Well, let me just respond. It is a process. It is a process. So there's not a magic answer, at least in my experience. And but I'm interested in other thoughts, please.
Natalia?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Jones. I'm also on the PTSA Race and Equity Committee with Anne.
Hello.
I would echo everything Anne said, and then add to that I think our teachers and our administration really need support from the district. They need more support than they've been getting, because the race and equity teams, as you pointed out, are mostly in other schools. They're in a minority of schools across the district. And I think we could benefit from some of that training support that the district provides. I think all schools could benefit from that. Mm-hmm. And I think it would help us to retain teachers of color. We continually lose teachers of color. In fact, we're losing a really, really important advocate for racial equity right now, this year. So it's really disappointing. He's been a real leader in the school, and just doing fantastic work. And we have a core group of teachers who are really doing fantastic work, really trying to get the staff together in affinity groups and, spend a lot of professional development time discussing issues of race and issues of equity. And all of that work really needs support from the administrative side, which I don't think they're getting. And then also our students, they need to know that when things happen, when there are incidents that occur, they need to know that there are consequences and that they're appropriately, and I don't want to say quickly, but investigated in a time frame in which a student feels like it hasn't been put on the back burner and is of low importance. So that would be my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, I got Sheldon.
Yes.
Just a lot, and I've sat in on a couple of those the Race and Equity Committee meetings. I'm not able to join because a lot of the times I've been my Seattle Special Education PTSA meetings instead, and I heard you speak at the SC at the council event and really enjoyed hearing you there. I would say that the ableism and I think you talked about really being seen and feeling. Was trying to get my notes in there, but just really that sense of the students really feeling seen. I think that the students are an incredible asset. Those that are aware and knowledgeable. My daughter did take the ethnic studies class at Roosevelt and really enjoyed it, and had heard that it was going to be something that was brought into all the curriculum. I would love to see that the curriculum as a whole, it's not ethnic studies, it's US history, accurately told, really honestly told. I just feel like there might be more opportunities with the students. I think Natalie has some really interesting points and some good aspects of it. I don't plan to ever get rid of this. This is a Roosevelt news from 2 years ago. And that it was, when I saw the image and that it was so amazing to me to see that there was no adult somewhere in the system where this cover was not seen as an image that is, and so it's the whole story is about addiction and how addiction costs different people. And it just, I think people don't realize that overt racism is so, has a fairly rich history just right here in Northeast Seattle.
Yes.
A lot of knowledge, the lack of knowledge about the covenants and the racist restaurants and those types of things. So I guess it's kind of mind blowing to me that people aren't paying closer attention. And I think the students themselves can be a boon to that.
Yes, yes. One thing we are trying to do is make sure that we lift up student voice. We have a student advisory board. I meet with them actually on Thursday, but we're getting ready to click in a student added to the board of directors. So they'll be guiding us from a policy perspective. So that's a new feature. So we're in agreement that students, they're probably one of the best advocates, they're definitely the best truth tellers about where we need to go and how they're seeing the world. So thank you, and we're in agreement.
Clyde, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just a quick question. This side goes to Rare. I see the group here, white, black, Asian, et cetera, it's all there. In terms of the white students at Roosevelt themselves, because I don't see much of this as being a people of color problem. It's a white problem people of color have been dealing with. So I want to know your student body as a collective, where's the mindset of the student body in addressing this issue?
Okay. I don't know if we have any teachers at Roosevelt on this call here, but is there anyone that wants to address that question from Clyde?
Well, I'm a parent, so I'm not in the schools, but I think that there's some students that are very aware because they've been paying attention, but I think a lot of students, this is, I think the overriding thing is that in a predominantly white school, kids go to school as white, and so they don't go to school as black. They don't know really in a very intuitive way at all what it's like. And so for them, it's a process of learning that has to happen for them to have the empathy and understanding. So I think things like that, the paper thing can happen because people are just they're not facing the world as a black person every day. They're facing the world as a white person. So to answer your question, I think there are some students, there's a race and equity club that was started this year. There's some things going on where some students are very engaged, very aware, but there's, it's a very big school, there's probably a lot of kids that don't think about it too much.
Thank you.
Clyde, we're going to make a proposal to Dr. Jones later on in this meeting that I think speaks to part of your question.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Just for reference, I just sent out a picture on my Facebook page of my graduating class I'm from Lake Washington High School. So I came up with my sister, Sam Jackson, and me being the only Blacks from my experience. So I understand what you're saying in terms of not seeing it from a Black perspective, but right on Tim, because I was hoping that it was going in the direction of coming up with a plan to address that kind of an issue. So that's me.
So we have one comment in our chat from Mr. Gerald Donaldson, and the statement is, we need student equity teams in every building. It should be at all grade levels. That's his comment. Mr.
Well-
Donaldson, did you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, can I just give a preview to Gerald Donaldson? I mean, he has done amazing work at Leschi Elementary School about lifting up voices of elementary students and really respecting them, really giving them a seat at the table. And this is something that can be replicated across the district. And if we can do it with elementary students, we could do it with middle school and high school for sure. But Gerald Donaldson is a person who recently won an award from King County for his work. He is an amazing contributor and somebody that I rely on to mentor me and give me guidance around this concept of student voice. And so if Gerald Donaldson wants to speak, I don't know if he's still on the line or not. I think it'd be helpful for us to hear from him.
He's on the line.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Good evening, everybody. Just give a little background. We started our student equity team 7 years ago, kinder through 5th grade. And the point of it was that as adults, we made decisions at every level in the building except for the people we serve, right? So the thought finally came to us that if we're going to serve our babies properly, we had to have their voice. And without their voice, we're just making decisions because sometimes because of our arrogance and sometimes just because we had to get something done. So I know every school should have one. It's a process. It's going to take some time. But I was talking to Dr. Jones before, and I still think, and again today with our principal, I think every school should have one. I think students should sit on the interview team. I think they should be on our building leadership team. I think students should have a say in or understanding what the budget's being spent on, because sometimes it might not go directly to us. It goes directly to the students, but if they don't have a say, they might not buy into it. And students on the school board. I think I heard Dr. Jones said there's going to be a student down there, but I also think that it should be a school board that encompasses all grade levels. So senior high school students can run the board, but I think they need that input from elementary students and middle school students. They can have a student school board. I also think there's a possibility, I was at our PTA meeting the other day, is along with equity also goes with hiring teachers of color, that we can maintain teachers of color, right? Because if you see people who represent you, you're more likely to have input into your building. So I think that's another thing that we need to work on. And if I have a second, I give you a little insight on what I think it might look like, is that if we're hiring teachers of color, they should be able to serve in Seattle Public Schools for 5 years. We need to work with the union to make sure they don't get ripped. But also, having said that, work with the city of Seattle so we can make sure that it has adequate housing in the area that they teach in, let's say, Central and South Seattle, where their housing is reduced by 50% so they can afford to live there. And then if they stay at that school for 5 years, their monies that they spend on school should be washed out. I think that's important. So our babies can see people who look like them and represent them. And I mean, that's all I have to say, but doing equity teams would be great for everybody. If you have any questions or anything, you can ask me. We started it. We're going to other schools and doing the same thing. And while I'm at it, we have king makers of Seattle. We also need to get our queen makers in there so we can represent our young sisters too. So thank you for allowing me to speak. And Dr. Jones, it's always good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Gerald.
Great. Okay. Questions, issues, opinions? Everyone's quiet? No questions? This is your chance.
Here's a comment in the chat. It says we need to use some of the programs that are successful and already established by pioneers like Gerald Donaldson. It's not necessary to create new programs in the district when we already have examples of programs that work.
Yes, and I think you all may be privy to another one of my mentors, Dr. Donald Felder. He always talks about find what works and make it spread. You'll hear him say that pretty often. And so there are lots of examples of what works in Seattle School District. And I think we don't have to reach far. We're actually a national leader, regional leader in a lot of regards of what we're trying to do. And so you best believe out of 104 schools, there's lots of promising practices that if we just look in our own backyard, there's pieces that we can lift up and spread. Our racial equity teams, fabulous. The student racial equity teams are outstanding. Like I mentioned, there's places where they're doing restorative practices, and they're being very successful with those. And so I think there's some curation in our own school district that we can look to have really good practices. So I see a couple hands up. I think there's a John and Sherilyn. Maybe go in that order, please.
Okay, John, Tab.
Yep. Hey all, great to see you. Dr. Jones, fabulous presentation. Thank you for taking on a very difficult role as Seattle School District Superintendent during these times. And I guess from a fundamental understanding on my part, I guess I'm not clear on this, is do each schools have ideal demographics to achieve as far as racial representation? And if they can't meet their goals, are there mechanisms for trying to even out those discrepancies? I think the bottom line, of course, is that each school, no matter of their demographics, has equal opportunity for excellent education. That's the total goal. And, you know, I guess I'm just I'm not really clear on what the mechanisms are behind achieving those. It's a big question, so thanks.
Let me take a run at it. You packed a lot in there, and it's a high quality question, actually. We talk about this concept of targeted universalism, and the universalism is a standard for open anyway. Hey, Danae, my friend Danae, take yourself off mute. Put yourself on mute.
Sorry.
So targeted universalism is a concept where there's a standard for students to meet, for all students to meet. And the targeted piece is around what do students need from the system to meet that target. And so if the target in this case is 8th grade algebra, taking 8th grade algebra, it's nothing wrong with the students that aren't meeting that target. It's something around what's happening with the system that is not providing the support or the mechanisms for that student to meet that target. And so I don't know if that's touching your question, John, but that's part of the reason why we're centering African-American males in the strategic plan, is because our system has not done what it needs to do to get them up to that universal standard that we want all the students to meet. And so that can be achieved across the board in the district, no matter what your composition is, as long as you have a focused approach and you know what you're doing and you recognize what are the system barriers and the system enablers that are going to help the students get to that universal standard. So that's my shot at answering your question, John. And if you run back at me if I didn't get it all.
Carolyn, I think you're next.
Yeah, I love hearing about the targeted universalism. A big advocate of universal design for learning. It very much feels that, you know, centering that child furthest from educational justice. I'm going to take that, and then the point about the third grade reading. You know, we got the early literacy screening that's going to be starting this year, starting to roll out, and making sure to find start to identify kids who may be dyslexic or dysgraphic, dyscalculia. So I guess I want to know if that centering that African American male who who needs to be reading by third grade because, you know, learn to read to learn. And when you look at both the under and the over indexing for Black males in terms of special education, is that part of how we would be looking at it, is to make sure, for example, that the third graders, again, you know, what's failing in the system, that he hasn't got dyslexia and hasn't been identified.
Yeah, so yeah, I think everything should be analyzed and on the table, from our diagnostic processes to our assessment processes, and I think there's an argument to be made to do that through a culturally responsive approach and lens. And so I believe that there's a lot of tools out there, but where do we start the analysis from? Do we start it from a matter of that the student has a deficit, or do we have a presumption that the student actually has from an asset base? And so I think that's some of the work that we need to do going forward. So diagnosis, whether it's assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment, all of that, we need to continue to analyze and improve and do some continuous improvement on that.
We have a couple of more chat comments in the chat. One question, kind of, sort of, and then another question. So I'll read Nancy Woodland's statement first, and she's actually asking for your thoughts. Positions of power and influence have outsized impact on the policies and also the cultures within the school and the district. Structures such as volunteerism, school boards, and PTAs can uphold systems we talk of dismantling due to the ways they are set up. I am specifically thinking of the school board. It's harder and harder for people with less privilege, and in parentheses, whiteness, wealth, dual households, close parenthesis, to participate in those influential spaces. Your thoughts?
On or around 2018, we started talking about this concept of community engagement, and people started getting kind of serious about it. We still haven't crossed over to do authentic, consistent, predictable, deep community engagement. I believe that's a game changer. If we really want to hear and break down the power structure and share power, disrupt business as usual and replace it with something better, we're going to really interrogate how are we accessing the funds of knowledge from community. And so I think that is a main way that we can really look at these positions of power and influence and insist that our school board carry out the values of community. And we do that through community engagement, and not just at the school board level, but at the superintendent level, at the mid-level manager level. Once we are engaged in real, authentic principles of community engagement, I think that's when we start to break down that power structure. But we have to have a real, true commitment to sharing power. If not, it gets consolidated in the way that Nancy has represented it here. So I think that is a key function for me to really start to open up the power structure through community engagement.
Nancy, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to make a comment?
If you wouldn't mind, I just have a quick follow-up. I am a guest in this group. I am thrilled to have been invited by Molly Edson, but my student is at Garfield, not at Roosevelt, but this was a great opportunity to hear from all of you. I think specifically, Dr. Jones, I'm thinking of things like within the school board. In order to be on the school board, you have to be able to give 30, sometimes 40 hours a week of volunteer time. It's all volunteer. And then when you add the campaign, someone who's a single mother who is, you know, really committed to race equity may not be able to compete against the parents that are HCC parents, highly capable cohort parents like myself, because of the privileges and other components. A single mother, we have some candidates that are, or at least one candidate that's an amazing African-American woman from marginalized populations. How can we change those structures so that the community engagement piece that you just championed is also met with a group of folks that aren't necessarily in the same position, that are working normal jobs and doing normal work and care about our kids, but actually have the identified positional power?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't have a real solid answer for you. I know that's a legislative process, and I do. However, I do think this board is focused on the right things, and I think until such times we can address how do you become a school board and all the trappings of what you have to go through and what type of resources and time that you have, I think we need to double down on this concept of community engagement. I think that's how we can kind of backstop that issue around sharing power. But until we get to a legislative process where we change the way that school board members are elected and whatnot, I think, again, I'm going to lean on this concept of engaging with community. And I think if we do it in a robust and, again, meaningful way, I think will help us move to a place where we have, like I mentioned before, better power sharing.
Joe, do we have time for one more question, or did you want to move on through the agenda?
Let's go ahead and introduce the two initiatives that we have, and I'll ask Tim to go first. And then after we've done that, depending on how much longer Dr. Jones can stay on board, we can take additional questions. So Tim, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to you, and so you can introduce one of the two initiatives that we'd like for Dr. Jones to consider.
Can I just jump in? Sarah's face looks so disappointed that she didn't get to ask her a question. I want Sarah to, can Sarah just get it in? If
Yes.
you just put it in the chat, maybe I'll answer it later, but please.
Okay, you want to answer? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm on my phone in a parking lot, and but I do have a face that doesn't lie. It's an asset or a problem depending on who you talk to. I actually am taking over for Anne. I'll be the chair of the Race and Equity Committee next year at Roosevelt. And one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is how to get more people involved. And so already we've been talking here about community engagement and how to get people more involved. And I'm just wondering if there's anything you've learned, Dr. Jones, through COVID that we could use some tactics that were used during this online world that we've been in, that we could use going forward, because so far we've just been doing Zoom, right? But we have the potential to go back, and I haven't heard any conversations about how things will be restarted PTSA wise and committee wise and even school board wise. Are they going to be meeting in person? Are you going to be meeting people in person? And how could we harness some of the things that we learned during this terrible time? There were some good things that came out of it, like being able to be sitting in a parking lot in a meeting like this, doing two things at once, right? So I'm really curious to know your thoughts on things that we could use that we learned during COVID that would help with bringing more people in that are not the traditional PTSA types.
You know, I have this theory that some students are more recognized now than they've been recognized because their square is the same size as everyone else on the Zoom screen. And so they all get acknowledged. They all get met at the door, so to speak, with a warm welcome. They all have an opportunity to be seen and heard in ways that they haven't. So I think we can use that mechanism that we're doing right now for fast convening. It aggregates information really well, and it can supplement any of our in-person meetings. A lot of people that don't have access to be able to come down to a meeting, to come down to a school board meeting, to come to one of these type of meetings can do it like you, Sarah, in their car and really have access to the dialogue. And that's something that we hadn't thought about before. Like, I am sick of Zoom. I tell you, I'm sick of Teams, all of that stuff. But I know it's a mechanism for me to be able to get in contact with somebody in real time. It doesn't matter where they are, in between. They could do it while they're in the yard or cooking or in between kid pickups, whatever. This is a mechanism. I think it's an underappreciated resource that we have, but I just think it's now a new supplemental tool that everybody knows how to use now. I think that's one, and I think the other piece is that we've learned that people have that being in person on the other side, being in person is necessary for some of the socio-emotional, contextual understanding. That's really important. I don't want to discount just the feeling and the power and the inferences that we gain from when we're in person. But again, I just want to go back to this medium right here is a super tool for us to be able to get people into spaces really quickly, and it's kind of equalizes the playing field a little bit as long as you have digital access. And so we still need to work on that piece, because that's also a game changer as well. So that's my response to you. I know it's not elegant, but it's real in terms of what I've been seeing as a tool and a mechanism.
Okay, Tim, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Again, Dr. Jones, like everyone else has been saying, thanks so much, for being here and meeting with us. So we're pleased, in the rare organization that we've almost reached our goal for the scholarship. We have this documentary underway, and we've been asking ourselves, what can we do that would be, a next contribution to racial equity. And the thing that has bothered a lot of us is the very segregated lives that we lead. Speaking for myself, I was a Roosevelt student. I was with the white kids. I only knew one or two Black kids, and there was only a couple of Asians in the school that I remember. And now, with Rare, I finally have friends of color. It's a wonderful thing. And the question I'm asking myself all the time is, why didn't this happen back in high school? So the objective is to do something about these very segregated lives. And the idea is to come up with some fun and interesting activities that would involve both white kids and kids of color. And ideas are things like dance or cooking, music, or various kinds of recreation. Some activities might be 1 or 2 evenings a month. Other activities might be a week-long undertaking, in some remote corner of the Northwest. All activities would be handled and managed not by Rare people, but rather by partners. And we think there's all kinds of candidate partners. You can look at Islandwood, for example, or Cascade Bike Club, or all sorts of organizations that already have youth activities. And, our plan would be to start with a pilot that involves several kids from, say, Rainier Beach and several kids from Roosevelt. And assuming that goes well, start building out more partnerships and recruiting more kids. Now we see implementation as being, the idea is pretty simple, but the implementation would be extremely difficult, at least in our conversations. But one reason we do think we have a chance of success is that Roosevelt alumni, perhaps uniquely in the Seattle school system, there's thousands of us who have really strong connections in academia, in government, corporations, nonprofits. We know people who know people who know people. We think that will be a real asset that is unique to Roosevelt alumni, that can help us form the partnerships, secure financing, and pull whatever strings need to be pulled to make this all happen. So that's the idea in a nutshell. I was supposed to stay under 5 minutes, according to Joe. So over to you.
Well, let me just say this. I saw the initiative, the exposure pilot. I love it. I want to support it. If you all run with it, I'll find somebody on my team to help you all stand it up. I think this is that type of intervention that's necessary and needed. It's something that I benefited from as a kid coming from the South End up to Broadview in the North End. We got exposed to things that we wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. And same with the kids from Broadview when they got exposed to these kids coming up from the South End. And it was along racial lines. But the only people that had a hard time with that were the adults trying to figure it all out. Us students, we had it figured out. It was no issue. And so a replication of this is something that I think is long overdue. There's probably good evidence of it in other parts of the district. I mean, I'm sure there's some type of exchanges that we've done for exposure somewhere over the last couple of years. It's just a matter, again, as I used the term before, curating the district for maybe there's already examples of this. And so if you all have a resource base that can make this come alive, I would love to see it. And I would even commit, like, I don't know, I would do it right here on the spot, $5,000 for some seed money to get it going. So if there's so let's go. This seems like something that would be awesome. So
10 and we have a deal, Brent.
Okay, I got okay, it's 2,500 now, times 2.
Okay. Our second initiative, and we've already talked a lot about it, is restorative justice. Yes. And implementing that in more schools. And it is our understanding that one of the challenges for schools to have a restorative justice program in their schools is funding. And like Tim said, we're Roosevelt, and we've got a lot of influence, a lot of sway, a lot of individuals that we can go to with good programs that they will support. And what we're wanting to do is to utilize our influence and to partner up with other schools in terms of starting restorative justice programs in those schools. And just like what Tim said, we start off as a pilot program, learn the ins and outs, working with members of your staff in terms of which would be the best schools and how best to do it. But our role would be in coordinating that and again, getting the funding for it to happen in not just Roosevelt, but in other schools as well, helping them do that.
Yeah, I thought about this one, and I didn't get a chance to go and do the homework around who has restorative justice programs already at Seattle Public Schools, but I know that there are restorative justice trained individuals throughout our district. I would suggest that we ask them, how do we lift this up? What would be use them as advisors? And so I'm willing to ask someone on my team to partner with somebody on this group or a couple of you on this group to see where we can go with it. But I think it's a fantastic idea. And what I think I know of Roosevelt, you all are long overdue for some restorative justice. And so let's put that in place so that we can move some of these issues forward. We have new leadership coming in at the principal level. This is kind of that golden opportunity to maybe instill social justice principles and have social justice expertise be amongst you and part of the fabric of what you do. So I would be more than happy to make the connections so that you all can lift this up. And since Tim has another $10,000 he's willing to find for the Roosevelt alums, I think money shouldn't be a problem.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, great, because we're all about talking and discussing and everything, but the bottom line is results. Yes. And getting stuff done, and that's what we're all about here. So not sure how much more time you have, Dr. Jones. If you have time, we'll take a couple more questions, but if you don't, we understand.
No, I need to go. I have a board seat. This is the first day that we're doing return in-person board meeting, and we're having a work session as we speak. And I told them I had VIPs I had to meet with, but my time has run out. But I will come back, and I'll come back with friends pursuant to what you all want to talk about. So I'm honored and grateful to have the time with you all. And Joe, if you could collect feedback around what I've said or what I didn't say, I'm interested. I'm a feedback junkie, and my job is to serve. If I'm not serving right, I need to know that. And if I am serving right, I need to know what to do more of. And so please collect any feedback that you might have for me. And I will come back if you ask me to come back.
Okay. Again, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll definitely get that feedback to you. And again, thanks a lot.
All right. Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Take care.